Okay, welcome everyone, and it's good to see you. The title of today's History Day support session is Using Feedback to Improve Your Project, and the session is for students. We ask that you guys stay muted unless we ask you to unmute, but there's just a few of you, so I'm sure that'll be fine. So my name is Miss Leah. I'm here today with Miss Grace, and we both work for Maryland Humanities, and we help organize the state level Maryland History Day contest, which is really fun. We get to meet lots of cool students and teachers all the time. In this session, we're going to start out by going over the 5 most common critiques of History Day projects, and we'll give you some tips for how to use those critiques to improve your project. And then for the rest of the time, we're going to let you guys share some of the feedback that you got and give you some advice on how to use it. So the thing about feedback is that it might be a little bit scary to get feedback on a project if this is your first time doing a project like this, especially if the judge or the teacher has written a lot, but that's actually a great opportunity for you to take a critical look at the work that you've done and figure out how to make it better. So everyone has to give or get or use feedback at some point in their life, no matter what their job is. We're getting feedback at our job. We're using it to become better outreach people. And if you get feedback that makes you feel bad, we're all going to feel disappointed by feedback we get at some point in our lives. I usually recommend to take a day before you do anything about it. And then you'll come back with fresh eyes and you'll understand that your teachers or whoever it is just want to see that you can see you being the best that you can be. And that it's all meant just to push you further and to make you better scholars. So I've got a little PowerPoint that I'm going to bring up. Okay. Here we go. All right, so using feedback to improve your History Day project. And I'm just going to jump right into our first most common critique point, which is the thesis could be made stronger. So this is something that you might hear from your teachers. So my advice, if you get this critique, is to read your thesis again and look for some of these things. Is there enough detail that someone who's not familiar with the topic will be able to understand it? So when we are teaching thesis statements to students, we always encourage you to have the who, what, when, and where all in your thesis statement, just to give it some context so that anyone can understand the background of your topic. The next piece of advice I would give is, or the question to ask yourself is, did you explain or define any important term or events that you included in your thesis? So for example, if you're introducing something like the fireside chats, some of your readers might not know what they were, so it's a good idea to define that. Next thing, do you show its significance in history? And I really think the best way to show significance is through short and long-term impact, and try to get both of those in there if you can. You don't need to write whole sentences on either of them. Just a short phrase is enough so that we know where you're going with the project. And then finally, do you make a clear connection to the theme of communication and understanding? And that's a big one that they look for in History Day, especially.
Yeah, so I can talk about this part a little bit. And this part, we're just going to walk through a little bit, like what that process of improving a thesis can really look like. So there's a couple examples, and these are theses. This is kind of like a process we often see when we see History Day projects, a thesis starting at this point and improving as it goes. So it's kind of a first round thesis, right? It might say Gandhi marched to the Arabian Sea to collect salt in April 1930. Why do you think he would do that? Read more below. And so one of the first things I think about is I kind of like to keep questions out of my thesis. The job of your thesis is to provide answers, not to ask questions. So questions can be helpful in an introduction or maybe in other parts of your paper or other parts of your documentary or exhibit. But in the thesis, in that bulk, like introduction to your argument, you want to kind of just provide answers, not questions. And another one I think about is that this one needs a little bit more detail. It doesn't really provide an argument. It doesn't really tell us more detail about Gandhi's Salt March. So I'm looking for a little more detail. So if I got this advice about the thesis being made stronger, I might go a step forward, and it can look like the next thesis we have an example of on the next slide, which will look like this. So this is about how Satyagraha was Gandhi's belief in peaceful, nonviolent resistance. Martin Luther King Jr. used this during the civil rights movement. So this thesis, it's evolved a little bit. We're getting a little bit more of a sense of the project, but there's still not that much detail between what Gandhi did and how it influenced other topics and other conflicts. So we get kind of an idea that Gandhi might have influenced the civil rights movement. We get a kind of idea of that long-term impact, but it doesn't really explain it that clearly. And we also didn't get a great connection to a theme. That's something we want to see in a lot of History Day theses and History Day projects, that connection to, for this year in particular, connection to communication. So there's kind of one more round of the thesis, and that's where we get to this final thesis. You'll see right away, it's a bit longer, right? It goes into more details. It has that who, what, when, where that Ms. Atnat was talking about. So we can look at it like this, right? It says in April 1930, Mahatma Gandhi led thousands of Indians on a march to the Arabian Sea to protest the British salt tax. British authorities responded to this civil disobedience and made more than 60,000 arrests. While it would take 17 more years for India to gain independence, the legacy of the Salt March and Gandhi's nonviolent philosophy proved the effectiveness of nonviolence as an instrument of political change. Right, so we get some, like, it's a lot more fleshed out. We're getting a lot more information. We're introduced to an argument and to long-term impacts. So we're hitting a lot of that detail that the thesis is asking for. And so that process can feel kind of overwhelming. It definitely takes a lot of rounds. So I also always like to remind everyone that that's what the feedback process is about. It's about taking a second, thinking a little bit deeper about your thesis or other parts of your project, and building them out into more detail. And that's why it always is going to take a couple times to get something to the best it can be.
Okay, so the next common critique that we see a lot is a judge might say something like, this needs broader research or needs more primary sources. So you might have received this feedback if all your primary sources are images, or if all your secondary sources come from places like history.com and Britannica. And I don't want to say like that history.com and Britannica are totally bad, you shouldn't use them. They're fine, but often, like, Britannica is a reference source, so it gives a very surface view of the event at hand. And secondary sources, like history books, might go a little bit more in depth, might give their own interpretations and a little bit more substance, a little bit more analysis. So it's good to get into those and see what historians really think beyond just the surface facts of an event. So if you get critiques like that for primary sources, we're always going to tell you to go straight to the source for primary sources. So places like the Library of Congress and the National Archives, they own their own collections. So you won't be hunting around to see who owns the rights to a certain image or source. And they have so much stuff digitized online that's just ready for you to find. If you're looking for text, I would say look for newspapers that talk about your event. Newspapers are really easy to find. All you need to do is search for that specific time frame that you're looking for. Search for some keywords and see if you find anything. And then think about what other text sources might exist pertaining to your topic and seek them out. And it's going to be different depending on what your topic is, but they are most likely out there. Anime might be a little bit different. I know that's a different kind of topic, and you're probably, a lot of your primary sources are going to be video and images, and that is just fine. But you can also, if you're looking at comic books, you can also look at the words in the comic books are a text in themselves. And that's definitely a primary source that you can use. For secondary sources, we actually put together a webinar like this a few months ago with some tips on where to find secondary sources, how to use them. So I recommend that you guys check that out. So our website is mdhumanities.org. And then if you find History Day and the For Students page, the webinars are on there. Okay.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about this next one, which is a big comment we get, especially kind of earlier on in the feedback process. You might get a feedback that says you need proper image credits. This is for exhibits and websites, but also kind of can apply for documentaries. And what that basically means, this is a little screen grab that we took from the rule book for History Day. And it just means that the images that you include in your project, you've got to credit where they've come from. And that's just part of crediting work, crediting ownership. It's kind of like our citations that we do in our History Day projects. And so an example here is image credit for this photo of Alice Paul. And this is the kind of format that we use for exhibits and websites. Just gives a little bit of detail about the title of the image, when it's from, and who has this ownership. So that first part, this is Library of Congress, that's kind of explaining the factual credit. And then below it, this is a caption for an image. You can decide if you want to put a caption in or not. They don't all need captions, but it can be kind of helpful to contextualize the image and explain why it's important to your project. Awesome. And can you run to the next slide, Leah? Thanks. No worries. Yeah, so this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about that needing proper image credits. A big part of that is who owns the right to an image. So like the one we just saw, right, they credit the Library of Congress, you might credit the National Archives. If we're thinking about the anime example, you might credit who the publisher was or who the author is of the anime you're talking about. Might be a museum. What it often is not is it's normally not going to be like Wikipedia or Google Images. That's kind of like the first layer. That's where you found that image. But there's going to be like a second or third layer to who actually owns that image. And a lot of times that detail will be included in the website or like the Google image search or the Wikipedia article that you find. So it's just about digging for that ownership. Yeah. And so this is what the proper image credits look like for the documentary. It's really similar to what I was talking about with the exhibits and the websites. It's just almost like a credit roll. So you'll include some information about the different images you found at the end of your documentary, like you can see in these two screen grabs from two previous History Day documentaries.
And one thing to note about this, if you're doing a documentary, you don't need to credit each individual image or video that you use like you do for image credits on an exhibit. You just need to give who owns the rights to that video clip or image in one long list. So if you get 10 different videos or images from the Library of Congress, you can just list Library of Congress and that covers all of them. So it's a little bit easier this way. You can put in a rolling credit if you want to. It doesn't have to be rolling. It can just be a still shot of that one slide with that list on it. But yeah, that should definitely be in there to give proper credit to those collections. Okay. So another thing that you might hear in your feedback is don't quote secondary sources. And the main reason for this, it's not exactly a rule, but it's something that we definitely tell students not to do, but it's because you guys are the storytellers and we really want to hear the story in your own words. So instead of taking those quotes directly, you want to read a few different primary sources and paraphrase the info that you're getting from them. Because you shouldn't be leaning too heavily on what other historians have to say about your topic. You guys are the historians in this case. Primary source quotes, however, are good because those are the raw materials of history. And you are going to use those quotes to help you support your own thesis and your own interpretations instead of just borrowing another historian's. And one problem that I think some students run into when they use secondary source quotes is, quotes don't count toward your word count. So if they try to paraphrase, that messes up their word count. But Unfortunately, there's no good workaround for that. You might just need to cut down your story and remove some things. But as I say here, that can be a chance for you to refocus on what's most important in your story. You might need to cut out some details that don't actually help you support your thesis. So you can stick to that word count or time limit.
Yeah, and kind of another example we've got here for something that can come up in a feedback session or in a teacher review or something like that is you might get advice to check the rule book to make sure you have all the elements you need. That's kind of the first step of the rule book, and something that is really important for this part, especially, I guess what I'm trying to say is this element about the rule book, it really applies if you're interested in competing in particular. So if you want to go to contests, something you'll need to make sure you're doing is you're following all those rules, you're checking all those boxes. And so some of the big ones for that are, in addition to your project, you should have a title page for papers, exhibits, and websites that kind of explain your word count. They tell your name, they give the category, and they also include your process paper word count. And then another part of this checklist, it's kind of like a project package is how I think about it, is the process paper. There's 5 questions listed in the rule book that just kind of prompt you to talk more about what was the process behind your project. And so you have to attach the process paper, and you'll also have to attach an annotated bibliography. So that's all of your citations, and also that kind of credit your sources, and also all of your annotations that explain how you use the source and how it fits into your project. So these are kind of the 3 pieces that need to be paired with your project to have it fit into all the rulebook requirements.
All right. I've got the sunlight hitting me in a funny way right now. Okay, so next I'm going to ask you guys what kind of feedback you got. But for anyone who's watching from home, I'm just going to stop recording right there. So anyone watching at home, good luck with your projects.